All right, hello everyone. Welcome to my channel, Tech Tutor. So if you haven't seen videos on here before, basically what I try to do for you is get you started with a little bit of code. I'm trying something different. I'm also adding a little bit more links to the sources of where I'm finding documentation or how it is that I may have found something that I'm using on these projects. Keep in mind, there are tons of ways to write code, tons of ways to utilize even libraries out there like Java Spring. So when I'm linking the Spring documentation, you might see that there's 3, 4, 5 different ways to set up the exact same thing. So keep in mind that you don't have to do everything the same way I'm doing it. And really, I'm just trying to get some basic projects set up for you to handle whatever your initial needs might be. If you need to do something more uh, complex, obviously keep reading the Spring documentation, and it's going to probably have something in there for you to, let's say, if you want to do pause or resume your Kafka topics, or you might have some other interesting use case, just make sure you go look at the documentation there. But here in this Docker Compose file, you can see that I am setting up Zookeeper and Kafka to run locally. If you are running this in more of a production ecosphere, then at that point you're going to probably connect to your actual Kafka running wherever it may be. It could be AWS, same with your Zookeeper instance, but even in later, newer versions of Kafka, you don't necessarily need Zookeeper, so keep that in mind as well. So in order to get set up and run this local instance on Docker, we're just going to utilize this Docker Compose file and spin it up via Docker Compose up -d. You might already be familiar with this if you've seen some of my other videos. You'll see that it's pulling images and starting them. For me, I already actually pulled these images, so we're kind of skipping that step. And Docker PS will show you if it's running or not, and you can see that both of the images are in fact running in the ports they're running on. So these are just some basic configurations that I'm using. I'm trying to basically call out the topic name, how many partitions and replicas. Obviously, this may change depending on what your particular use case is, but for a simple, basic Kafka cluster and a couple topics, this is what we have. So going into the next file, the application YAML, you can see some of the configurations I'm setting up. So I want to tell Java Spring where the server is. It's running on 9092 of localhost. I also want to specify serialization and deserialization for our producers and consumers. And then these configurations down here at the bottom here, all those is me just simplifying the groups and the topic. So I'm going to pass in a dynamic group name or topic name, and I want to be able to set that for my configuration files. So that's why I'm doing it here. Now, the next file, this Kafka configuration file is doing a few things. So I'm linking to my Kafka property that I had in this application YAML. That is with the configuration properties prefix is Kafka, and that's how I'm getting the first group, second group, and test topic value. Additionally, you want to use the enable Kafka annotation if you want to read up more on that. So I put this link here. And also, I am adding in this JSON message converter property, or bean rather. So I'm setting the record message converter bean to use JSON message converter. The reason why I'm doing this is so that way in my listeners, I can actually serialize into a message object instead of just being a string being handed to the Kafka listener. So if you want more details on that, just go look at the documentation there. Now over to the sample listener class. So this is actually where I am utilizing the Kafka listener annotations that Java Spring provides. And essentially what I'm doing is I'm showing you two different examples because there's different ways to add listeners and different properties for the listener, the values you're actually reading. So if you have a very basic listener, at least at most, you're probably going to want to at least specify the group that is listening for the topic as well. So in this example, I'm actually showcasing two groups because you can actually have multiple groups consuming from the same topic and they can perform different actions. Now, you may not be doing multiple groups within the same project, but just for the example here, that's what I'm doing. So I'm actually specifying it from the property that I set in the application YAML. So there's the first group and the second group. And I'm also grabbing that test topic from that property file as well. Now, what you're seeing here is that Spring will automatically serialize the message that it reads off of the topic into this message object that I've created. So I have actually created this message object. I've added getters and setters with Lombok and the @data annotation, and it only has one property, which is message body. So because back in this configuration class, I use the JSON message converter class and use that to set up the bean for record message converter, I'm able to actually serialize it straight into this message object rather than it just being a string. This is somewhat what you might consider kind of magic of Spring, but just know that Spring gives you a lot of these different configurations that you can set up to do things like this, to remove a lot of boilerplate code and just clean up your code, make it as minimal as possible. So I'm now logging in my listener that I got the message and indicating that I got it on the first group, just so that way when we're reading the log messages, we'll know exactly which listener handled it. Now, in the second listener, you can see I've added a little bit more complexity because maybe you want to listen to the message, but also get some headers. There's also a payload annotation, which we didn't need on this one because we were only listening to the payload. So just keep in mind, it's one of the things about Spring as well, is it can infer what exactly you are specifying in the arguments of the method, but also you can tell it specifically, no, this is the payload object, and this is the header object. And the header object does have a couple of properties as well. So I have created a header that will just have the name of message type, and I'm saying it's not required because if you don't specify it, I don't want it to fail. So as you can see here, I added another log message to indicate that this is the listener that handled this message. So that way you can just see the difference and see if it's getting the header or not. So I've already explained this message object class. Again, I'm just using that for my serialization and deserialization. And now I've created this message controller class. So the reason I did this is not necessary at all, but I'm just using this to showcase how I can send messages to our Kafka topic, one where it's just the message itself, and another one where I'll be sending it with a header or headers. So going into that message service class, you can see that my basic one where I'm just sending the message, no headers, looks like this. You're going to use the Kafka template, and this Kafka template class, you can just do string and string. This is the key and value. Now, the thing about Kafka is that key is not required, but you do need the value. And so this could have just been a string, but again, I'm utilizing Spring and how you can serialize and deserialize things and remove a lot of boilerplate. So I'm telling it that that message part of the Kafka message I'm sending out will be of type message object. So because of that, it understands that when I pass it a message object for the body of the message, it handles it automatically and will serialize it to send to the Kafka topic. So you can also get a listenable future as a result of you using the Kafka template send method. And there's multiple ways that you can send, or sorry, multiple implementations of the send method. So if we dig in here, you can see there's topic and data, there is partitions, you also have the ability to use producer record or even this message object. So that's actually how I ended up knowing that I could use the producer record to try to send some headers. So again, multiple ways you can do it. This is just the way I chose to send my messages. So with the second one, you can see that I'll also be using the producer record value, or class rather, to send the headers that I want. And that's how I'm going to now send the message type header with just the value of Spring Kafka. It's expecting bytes, so I'm just converting it to bytes by doing the string.getBytes method. And then I'm also logging the callback. So this way I know if it was successful, I will get the result of the success. And also if something caused an exception, I can also log that as well. So that summarizes all of the different classes, configurations that I have in this project. So we'll go ahead and run this, and I'll just showcase in Postman how I'm actually sending messages, and you'll see them in the logs, just to prove that it is consuming these messages successfully, and how it's taking the message object and doing serialization or deserialization as necessary. So let's go ahead and click the Run button. And as you can see, there's a lot of logging that I have enabled. It's telling you about all of the different things it's doing to set up the consumers, and you also see messages from the producers at some point as well. And so now let's go ahead and jump over to Postman. Okay, so over here in Postman, you can see that I have set up this dummy message API, so that way I can send messages. This one is without headers, this one is with the header. And so if I click send, and now we go back over to IntelliJ. So here you will see in the logs, it spit out a lot of information because it's logging actually a lot. But down here, you will see that the send result was logged. This is in the callback here. You can see that there are a lot of pieces of information going in here, but there's no key as expected because I didn't send a key. And here is the value, which I did send, which is message body is test. Now, over here too, you will see that in this producer record, I can pass multiple things, and I actually am going to send in the timestamp value as well. So whereas it was a timestamp of null here, I will be sending a value on the second one. You can also see that it got that first message in the first group listener. And so the first group received test, which is actually over here in listeners. And then the second group received the header of null because I didn't pass it a header, and it received the message as test as well. So going back over to Postman, if I send this second message that is supposed to have headers, and now I go back over here, you will now see that same kind of information. You'll see the send result. And now if you're digging into the send result, you can actually see that it does have the timestamp and the message body of test. And now coming over here, going to the first group, you still have the ability to properly read it, even though it has a header in it. You have test. And now here's the other part I was showcasing earlier, is that now that it does have a header, it is actually properly logging it and reading it. So Spring Kafka was the header I sent, and the message is still test. So that wraps it up. That's basically a very basic Kafka Java Spring project. If you have more complex use cases, I would just suggest reading the documentation, or if you have some specific question, just let me know in the comments below. And if you want to see any more details about the specific features of Spring Kafka, just go ahead and ask me. I can make a video about it if there's enough, or I'll just respond in the comments. Please take a moment to like and subscribe for future content. Thank you.